Let's continue on with the study of literary terms for grade 7 students. Continuing with character. In this class, we're going to define character as the personalities that are directly present in the narrative. They have to be seen or heard to be in the narrative. Bear in mind that a character does not have to be human. That's why we say personalities, not people. If someone's just talked about in a narrative, mentioned, discussed, described, but they're not physically in the story, then we're not going to consider them characters until they actually show up. The 3 A's in the I have to do with how to describe characters and making sure you're not just putting another name and that's it. So the I is identity. These are things that answer the question, who am I? Things like name, age, ethnicity, and gender. Appearance. It's how you perceive the character, any details you receive that relate to any of the 5 senses, not just how someone looks. Attitude. Any information revealed or received about the thoughts, beliefs, and feelings of that character. Oftentimes, one of the more important terms we'll talk about over the course of time is motivation. Motivation typically falls in the course of attitude, although motivation oftentimes dictates actions. For our purposes, we're going to describe actions meaning not just what the character does, but also the words the character says. As you might suspect, some of these things overlap. For example, a character talking. The words they say would be considered actions, but the sound of their voice or the expression on their face would be in their appearance. The emotions that it conveys is going to be attitude. The hard part sometimes is that the sound of someone's voice, because they're yelling, for example, does that mean they're angry or does it just mean their voice is loud? We have to start with what we know objectively, that their voice is loud, until we have words or things revealed, or we can infer reasonably their attitude or emotion that goes with that loud voice. Character types are ways of categorizing or grouping characters based on one or more of the elements in the 3 A's in the I. Major characters, characters whom you read or see the most. The way that also might define the word major as far as a character type is characters who are central or specifically important to the plot. They're going to be involved not only in the actions of the plot, but they're going to be involved in several events and probably in a conflict on a significant level. Whereas minor characters, you could look at it at one level of, let's say you go back to our strategy for plot, and you look at the 6 to 10 most important events in a story. Minor characters might not be present in many of them. There's not a hard and fast number that you need to use for that. But more importantly, they're not as critical to moving the plot, and they may not be as central to the conflict. Every character is either major or minor. Some teachers will want to add other layers to that, but let's right now start with either major or minor if someone's a character in a narrative. Another balance of character types is protagonist versus antagonist. These are terms that are defined based on the conflict. Now, a protagonist as character or characters doesn't have to be only one trying to positively resolve the conflict, meaning they're acting directly in that, not resisting the conflict. Doesn't have to be the main character, doesn't have to be a hero, but a main character and a hero are often also the protagonist. Antagonist is a character opposing the protagonist. The key in terms of antagonist, as we're going to define, is that character versus self. The idea that self isn't necessarily the antagonist unless we're talking about something really unusual, like a multiple personality situation that you oftentimes only see in science fiction or horror stories, unfortunately. However, in a character versus society or character versus character conflict, there's tangibly one or a group that actually qualify as a force or characters that are opposing that. The key is it's a character type, so it has to be a character that's an antagonist, not an idea. Moving on, setting. One of the most important things we're going to look at this year is that setting needs to be both time and place, not just place. It's not just a location. Another thing to think of this way is that a time affects place, because take your classroom. That classroom may look the same, but if you change the time of day, before school, during a certain class, during lunch, after school, on weekends, during the summertime, winter break, the time changes what happens in that place and what it's like. Also notice that setting is, in many ways, in many stories, kind of like a character. So you can describe setting by its time and place in terms of its labels, identity, the what is it, where is it, what time is it. You can also describe setting in terms of its appearance, what you see here, what you hear there. You can describe it in terms of actions. What kind of things happen there and what kind of things are said there. You can also describe it in terms of attitude, not in the sense that as a conscious sentient being, but in the sense that when people are there, when characters are there, how does it make them feel? Do they feel relaxed? Do they feel tense? Do they feel excited? Do they feel competitive? In those ways, a setting is really a character in a story in terms of how it impacts other elements. Please remember, just because you write down the setting at the exposition, at the start of a story or a narrative, doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't change. So please make sure you track that even over the course of a short story, let alone a longer work like a novel. Next thing we're looking at, theme versus subject. I put both elements up at once because oftentimes these get confused. Oftentimes people want to think of a theme as being family or young love. Those are really subjects. For our purposes, subject is going to be defined as a single word or two-word phrase that indicates the topic of a narrative. Friendship, racism, or family. Or fighting racism, or family bonds, or friendship challenges. Those are still going to be a topic. It doesn't really tell you anything about the idea. You can do a lot of different things within any one of those subjects. However, a theme, it's a single sentence stating the message or lesson the author wanted the reader to learn about life in general. And there's several elements there. First, it's a single sentence. It's not a whole phrase. It's not a whole paragraph. It's a complete sentence. It has to be a subject, verb, and the message or the predicate. It has to be a message or lesson from the author. So it can't just be a general idea, it can't be vague, it needs to be about something in particular. Oftentimes people look at, is this like a moral to a story? Well, in fact, a moral is a type of a theme, but morals typically only apply to ethical situations or they apply only to fables. And again, the author wants this message to be received by the reader, and it needs to be about life in general. It's not only if you happen to be in outer space fighting an evil galactic empire. It's not only if you happen to encounter a bear in the forest. It's not only if your name happens to be Steve. It's about life in general. A properly phrased theme will meet those requirements. Not every story has a theme. That's our start for literary terms for 7th grade. We'll of course add things as we go along, not just over the course of this year, but in years to come. Feel free to watch us again to make sure you haven't missed any of the commentary as well as what you saw on the screen. But also understand that you don't have to make complete sense of all these terms to start with. Hopefully some of these latched on to or connected with what you've already learned, and we can go from there as we explore the year.